Take that jacket off, Vincent said, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. Right now, before this gets worse. Claire Morgan looked down at the worn leather on her shoulders, her grandfather's jacket, and then back up at the man who'd been following her for 2 days. Her hands didn't move. It belonged to my grandfather, she said. That makes it mine. Vincent's jaw tightened. You have no idea what you're wearing. And he was right. She didn't. Not yet. If this story already has you hooked, subscribe to the channel and follow it all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Claire Morgan had not planned to spend the week of her grandfather's death going through his things. She had planned to get in, sign whatever papers the attorney needed, signed it, arranged for the house to be handled, and get back to Phoenix before the end of the month. She had a job. She had a lease renewal coming up. She had a life that did not include the small Arizona border town of Ridgecrest, where the pavement cracked in the heat, and everybody seemed to know everybody else's business before it even happened. But death doesn't negotiate with your schedule, and grief doesn't either. So there she was standing in the driveway of a house she hadn't visited in 11 years, looking at a yard that had gone wild in the way that old men's yards go wild when they've stopped caring about appearances and feeling something she hadn't expected to feel, which was guilt. Not grief at first, guilt. Because she hadn't come back. Because she'd told herself she was busy. She was building something. She'd come next summer, and next summer came and went, and the summer after that did too, and now Thomas Morgan was in a box at Ridgecrest Memorial, and she was standing in his driveway trying to remember the last time she'd heard his voice. She remembered. It was a Sunday call about 14 months ago. He'd asked if she was eating enough. She'd said yes. He'd said the garden was doing well. She'd said that was good. And she'd gotten off the phone in under 10 minutes because she had a work email she needed to answer. 14 months. That was what she had to live with. The neighbor across the street, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a watering hose that didn't seem to need much directing, lifted her chin when Claire pulled the suitcase up the front steps. You're Thomas's girl, the woman said. Not a question. Granddaughter, Claire said. Claire, the woman nodded slowly. Ruth Haley. I kept an eye on the place these last few weeks, made sure the mail didn't pile up. Thank you, Claire said, and she meant it. Ruth looked at her for a long moment, long enough to be just past comfortable, and then she said, You know he talked about you all the time. She paused. Said you were the best thing he'd ever done. Claire's throat did something she wasn't ready for. She nodded, couldn't quite form words, and pushed through the front door before she had to try about. The house smelled like him. That was the first thing, that specific combination of motor oil and coffee and something woodsy that she could never have named but would have recognized anywhere. She hadn't been inside in over a decade, but the smell hit her like a door swinging open in her chest, and she stood in the front hallway for a full minute, doing nothing but breathing. The house was tidy, tidier than she'd expected. Dishes done, counters, clear floors swept. Ruth Haley had probably helped with that. Or Thomas had just been the kind of man who didn't let things accumulate. There were photographs on the wall, the same ones she remembered from childhood, from the visits when she was 7, 8, 9 years old, when her mother would drive her out here for summer weeks, and she would follow her grandfather around like a small, devoted shadow. Thomas in his 30s, outdoors, somewhere squinting into the sun. Thomas with a dog she didn't recognize. Thomas and a woman who must have been her grandmother, who died when Claire's mother was still a teenager, and who existed only as photographs and secondhand stories. No motorcycles in the pictures, no leather, nothing that would have told you anything. She started in the kitchen because that felt manageable. Made a list of what needed donating, what needed throwing out, what the estate attorney would need to see. She worked methodically, kept her breathing, even told herself she was being professional about this. Practical. She was a practical person, that's what she was. By mid-afternoon, she had moved to the bedroom, and that's where the practicality started to crack. His reading glasses were on the nightstand, still folded like he'd just set them down. There was a library book on the table beside them, a Western novel, a bookmark stuck in somewhere past the halfway point. He'd never finished it. He'd never get to find out how it ended. Claire sat down on the edge of the bed and let herself cry for about 4 minutes. Then she wiped her face and kept working. It was the closet that stopped her. Most of it was ordinary shirts, slacks, The heavy winter coat she remembered him wearing on cold mornings, when he'd stand on the porch with his coffee, work boots, a pair of dress shoes that looked barely used, and then shoved all the way to the back behind the winter coat and a box of old files she found it. She didn't know what it was at first, just a dark shape heavy on its hanger. She pulled it forward, and the weight of it surprised her. Real leather aged to a deep brown black, the kind of weight you only get from decades of use. A biker jacket, a real one, not a fashion piece, not a costume, the real thing, the kind that had lived a life. She turned it around. On the back there was a patch. It was large. White background, bold red lettering. The artwork was unmistakable. A winged skull, the kind of image she'd seen in movies, in news stories, in the kind of documentaries that always seemed to start with the words, "Inside America's Most Dangerous." Hell's Angels. Below the main patch, another one. A small rectangular bottom rocker that read Ridgecrest. Claire stood in the closet of her dead grandfather's house holding a Hell's Angels jacket and tried to make it make sense. Thomas Morgan, who drank his coffee, black, and grew tomatoes in the summer, and drove a 2004 Ford pickup, and went to church twice a year, Christmas and Easter. Thomas Morgan, who fixed things around the house himself and paid his bills on time and argued with the television whenever the news came on. Thomas Morgan, who had never once mentioned motorcycles or clubs or any of this. This jacket did not belong to that man, except it was in his closet. She lifted it off the hanger, carried it to the bed, and looked at it for a long time. The leather was worn at the elbows and collar broken in the way leather gets when it's been lived in, not stored. Someone had worn this jacket, for years probably. Someone who knew exactly what it meant to put it on. She thought about calling her mother. Decided against it. Her mother was in Oregon, already managing her own grief from a distance, and Claire didn't want to add to that with questions neither of them could answer yet. She thought about calling the estate attorney. Decided that was absurd. Then mostly because she didn't know what else to do with it, and because she was standing in her grandfather's bedroom in the late afternoon heat, and the air conditioning was struggling, and she felt suddenly like she needed something to hold on to. She put it on. It was too big for her. Thomas had been a bigger man. The shoulders hung slightly, the sleeves long past her wrists. But when she zipped it up and looked at herself in the mirror on the closet door, something strange happened. It didn't look wrong. It looked she didn't have the right word. Significant, like wearing something that carried weight beyond its physical heaviness. She looked at the patch in the mirror. Hell's Angels, Ridgecrest. "What did you do, Grandpa?" she said to the empty room. The empty room didn't answer. She wore it to the hardware store the next morning. It wasn't a decision exactly. She'd left the house quickly the morning colder than she'd expected, and the jacket was the only heavy layer within reach. She grabbed it off the chair, where she'd left it, pulled it on and walked out. The hardware store was 3 blocks from the house, close enough to walk. Ridgecrest wasn't a large town, maybe 9,000 people, the kind of place where a new face got noticed and an old face got remembered. Claire had been here as a child, but that was long enough ago that she didn't expect anyone to recognize her. She was right about that. Nobody recognized her, but people noticed the jacket. She felt it before she understood it. The way the cashier, a young guy in his 20s, looked at her and then looked again. The way 2 men standing by the paint display went quiet when she walked past. Not rude quiet, something else. Something careful. An older man near the door held it open for her on the way out, then looked at the patch on her own back as she passed, and she caught his expression in the reflection of the glass door. He looked the way you look when you see something that doesn't compute, surprised and careful at the same time. She walked back toward the house, and she was halfway down the 2nd block when she heard a truck slow down behind her. It didn't stop, just slowed, pacing her for a moment, and then moved on. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself this the way you tell yourself things when the small hairs on the back of your neck are already making their argument. The second incident happened that afternoon. She was going through the papers in Thomas's home office, insurance documents, bank statements, property records, when she heard a car park on the street outside, heard a door open, footsteps on the sidewalk, a pause, and then footsteps walking away. She went to the front window and looked out. There was a dark SUV parked across the street, engine off. Nobody inside or nobody she could see. As she watched another car, a black sedan this time, slowed at the end of the block and then continued on. Ruth Haley's watering hose was going across the street. Ruth was watching the SUV too. Claire felt the first real thread of something that wasn't grief and wasn't guilt. something colder. She went back to the papers, tried to focus, made a list of questions for the attorney. She did not take the jacket off. Vincent Cross introduced himself the next morning. He knocked on the front door at 9:30, which was early enough to be intentional, and when Claire opened it, he was standing on the porch in pressed slacks in a collared shirt, a man somewhere in his late 50s with silver hair and the kind of face that had probably been handsome 20 years ago and had since hardened into something that was difficult to read. He was well dressed for a town like Ridgecrest. The dress shirt alone said he wasn't a local or wasn't an ordinary one. Claire Morgan, he said, Thomas's granddaughter. Yes, she said. Can I help you? My name is Vincent Cross. He smiled, and it was a professional smile, the kind used to occupy the lower half of a face without involving the eyes. I was an acquaintance of your grandfather's. I heard about his passing, and I wanted to offer my condolences. That's kind, Claire said. I didn't know his acquaintances. He didn't talk much about his life here. No, Vincent said. Thomas was a private man. His gaze moved briefly to her shoulders, to the jacket she'd put on again that morning, without thinking about it the way you reach for a coffee mug that's just become the one you use. He looked at the patch on the back, though she was facing him, and he could only see the lapels. He seemed to be calculating something. You found that in the house. It wasn't a question. I did, she said. A pause. The smile remained, but something shifted behind it. Claire, I want to be straightforward with you. That jacket represents something specific, something that carries meaning in certain circles. People in this town will see it and they'll form impressions. Some of those impressions could create complications for you. Complications, she said. You're here to handle Thomas's estate, settle his affairs. That's simple, and it should stay simple. He tilted his head slightly, his voice dropping into something that was very, very polite. Take the jacket off, put it back where you found it, or donate it, burn it, whatever you'd like, but don't wear it around town. Claire looked at him for a long moment. I just met you, she said. You haven't explained who you are or why you think you get to tell me what to wear. Something moved through his expression. Not anger exactly, more like the recognition of an obstacle. I'm telling you, he said, as someone who understands what that patch means, that you are drawing attention you don't want. That is a courtesy. The jacket was my grandfather's, she said. That makes it mine. Is there something else I can help you with, Mr. Cross? The smile didn't waver. I'll be in touch, he said, and he walked back to a car she hadn't seen arrive, black, expensive, idling at the curb. She watched it until it turned the corner. Then she went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and realized her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from something that felt more like the moment before a decision gets made. She called the estate attorney that afternoon. His name was Gerald Park, a local man, 50s, the kind of attorney small towns produce for small town work, thorough, careful, not flashy. She'd met him once the day after she arrived. Mr. Park, she said when he picked up, I have a question about my grandfather's history, specifically about his past with... She paused. Were you aware of any affiliations my grandfather had, motorcycle clubs? That sort of thing. A very long pause. Where is this coming from, Claire? I found something in his house, a leather jacket with a Hells Angels patch tattoo, Ridgecrest chapter. Another pause, shorter. I see. You knew, she said. I knew Thomas from the present, Gerald said carefully, not the past. Your grandfather had a chapter in his life before I knew him that he'd put behind him. He was very deliberate about that, about keeping that separate from everything else, from his family. How separate? He left the club before your mother was born, Gerald said. Completely. That's not, you don't just do that easily. He did it anyway. He had his reasons. A pause. Claire, where is the jacket right now? I'm wearing it, she said. Gerald's exhale was long and controlled. I would strongly recommend you not do that while you're in Ridgecrest. Not because I think you're in danger necessarily, but because there are people in this town who have long memories in a Hells Angels patch, even on Thomas Morgan's granddaughter. Especially on Thomas Morgan's granddaughter is going to open conversations nobody's had in 30 years. A man came to the house this morning, Claire said. Vincent Cross, you know him. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was careful in a way that made the back of her neck prickle again. Yes, Gerald said slowly. I know who he is. Is he dangerous? He's influential in certain circles. Gerald paused. Claire Gusignayo, do you have somewhere else to be? Can you give me power of attorney and let me handle the paperwork from here? I'm not leaving, she said. He was my grandfather. I owe him this. Then please, Gerald said, be careful. Show him. That night, she went through Thomas's papers more thoroughly, looking for what she'd now started to look for. She found almost nothing. He'd been good at this, good at the art of omission, good at keeping one life from bleeding into another. But in the bottom drawer of his desk, underneath a folder of old tax returns, she found a photograph. It was old color, but faded in the way photographs from the 1970s fade, the colors gone warm and imprecise. A group of men on motorcycles lined up on a desert road. She didn't recognize most of them. Big men, weathered-looking, the kind of faces that have been shaped by years in the sun. But she recognized the man in the center. He was 30 years younger and 40 pounds lighter, and he was smiling in a way she'd never seen in any other photograph of him, wide open. Unguarded, the smile of someone who belongs completely to where he is. Thomas Morgan, wearing a jacket that matched the one she had on. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in ink that had faded to pale blue Ridgecrest, 1978. The real family. The real family. She put the photograph face down on the desk, stared at the ceiling for a while. Then she opened the desk drawer again, picked the photograph back up, and looked at it for a long time. There were other men in it. She studied them. Most of them she couldn't identify, but one of them standing to Thomas's left, a big man, heavily tattooed. Even then, a beard that was dark in the photograph. Something about him was familiar in a way she couldn't place. She'd never met him, she was certain of that. But there was something about the set of the jaw, the way he stood, that she felt like she'd seen before. She filed that away and didn't know yet where to file it. Vincent Cross came back the following morning. This time he didn't knock. She came out the front door on her way to get coffee from the bakery 2 streets over, and he was standing on the sidewalk in front of the house with another man she didn't recognize. Younger, thick-shouldered, wearing a jacket that wasn't leather, but had something about it that was in the same neighborhood. Claire, Vincent said, same polite smile, same cool eyes. Good morning. Mr. Cross, she said. She didn't stop walking, which meant he had to pivot and fall into step beside her or block her, and he chose to pivot. The other man stayed where he was. I wanted to continue our conversation, Vincent said, walking alongside her. I remember the conversation, Claire said. You told me to take the jacket off. I didn't. I expressed a concern, Vincent said, for your benefit. That's very kind. She kept walking. I'm going to get coffee. If you'd like to walk with me, you're welcome to, but I'm not going to stop, and I'm not going to take the jacket off. Vincent was quiet for half a block. Then, you're Thomas Morgan's granddaughter. He was a stubborn man, too. I can respect the family resemblance. Did you know him? She said, and watched his face when she asked it. In a manner of speaking, Vincent said, Thomas and I had a complicated relationship. Old history, long before your time. He was in the club, Claire said. I found the photograph. Vincent stopped walking, and because she'd been watching him, she stopped it too. His expression had shifted finally into something more genuine than the smile, though it wasn't anything warmer. It was the expression of someone recalibrating. What photograph? 1978. A group of men on bikes. Thomas is in the center. She paused. Is that you in the photograph? How old are you? Vincent said, which was not an answer. 34. Thomas left the club before you were born, Vincent said. Before your mother was born. He left because he wanted out, and because certain agreements were made, certain things were settled. He understood what it meant to leave, and he accepted those terms, and he kept his end of the agreement for over 40 years. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You're telling me he bought his way out, Claire said, or paid some other kind of price for it. I'm telling you, he made a choice, Vincent said, and that choice had conditions attached to it, and one of those conditions was that nothing connected to the club is to be presented publicly ever again. He kept the jacket, Claire said. People keep things they shouldn't, Vincent said. That's a human failing, but keeping it in a closet is different from wearing it through town. What do you want, Mr. Cross? She said. Specifically, what outcome are you here to achieve? He looked at her for a moment, and she had the sense that he was genuinely deciding how honest to be. I want that jacket, he said. I want it back in a box, and I want it out of my town. Your town, she said. My town, he confirmed without any apology in it. It's mine, she said. He left it to me. Even if he didn't know he was leaving it, it's in his house, and his house is mine now, and the jacket is mine. Claire. His voice dropped. The politeness went somewhere else. You are carrying something you don't understand, and there are people watching who are not as measured in their responses as I am. I am being patient with you because I respected your grandfather despite everything, and because you are clearly not aware of what you've walked into. Take the jacket off. Give it to me. Let me handle this quietly and go back to Phoenix and live your life. You said you'd be in touch, she said. You're in touch, and my answer is still no. She walked the rest of the way to the coffee shop alone. The coffee shop was called Mesa Cup, and it was the kind of place that had been in the same location for 30 years and hadn't tried to become anything different. 4 tables a counter, a case of pastries, and a woman behind the counter who looked like she'd been there since the beginning and intended to stay. Her name was Donna, and she was probably 70, and she had the kind of face that registers everything and reacts to none of it. She looked at Claire when she walked in, looked at the jacket, looked at the patch. You're Thomas's girl, she said. Granddaughter, Claire said. Claire. Donna poured coffee without being asked. You know what you're wearing? I'm starting to, Claire said. Donna set the cup on the counter. Thomas Morgan was a good man. Whatever he was before whatever they tell you about him, you hold on to that. He was a good man. Who's going to tell me things about him? Claire said. Donna's eyes moved briefly to the window. Not obviously, just a flicker. Town's got a long memory, she said. Longer than it should. A man named Vincent Cross has come to see me twice, Claire said. Do you know him? Donna's hands stilled for just a moment on the counter. Then she picked up a cloth and began wiping the surface that didn't need wiping. I know who he is. Is he dangerous? Donna looked at her directly. He runs things, she said. In this town, in this county. Has for about 15 years. Came in from somewhere else, set up operations, and now he runs things. A pause. He and your grandfather had history. Old history. I don't know the details, but I know that when Thomas was alive, Vincent didn't come near him. Thomas was protected. By something. By the jacket, Claire said. Donna tilted her head. By the name, she said. By who he'd been. There are people out there who still remember, who still hold to certain codes. Vincent always knew better than to touch Thomas Morgan because touching Thomas Morgan would have brought other things down on him. And now Thomas is gone, Claire said. And now Thomas is gone. Donna agreed, Payenne. And you walked in wearing that jacket. Claire looked down at the leather lapels. He told me to take it off. What did you say? No. Donna studied her for a long moment. Then something shifted in her face, something small but unmistakable. Approval maybe, or recognition. Drink your coffee, she said. It's better when it's hot. Tika. Claire spent the afternoon doing what she'd come here to do. Making calls, sorting papers, drafting the list of household items for donation. She was methodical about it. She was very deliberate about being methodical because methodical was the thing she knew how to be when other things were trying to take up space in her head. The dark SUV was off the street again by 3 o'clock. Different angle than before down the block, this time, instead of directly across. She noticed it from the side window, and the noticing sat in her chest like something swallowed wrong. She was in the middle of cataloging the contents of Thomas's study when she found the second thing. It was not as dramatic as the photograph. It was a letter handwritten 2 pages, the paper old and slightly brittle. Her name wasn't on it. It was dated 16 years ago, and it began, "To whoever finds this after I'm gone." She sat down and read it slowly. Thomas wrote the way he spoke, or the way she remembered him speaking, direct, unsentimental, choosing words like he was paying for them. He didn't explain the full history of his time in the club. He gave the outline, joined Young Road, hard believed in the brotherhood, with the conviction of a man who'd never had family that worked right, did things he wasn't proud of, reached a point where he could see what the road ahead looked like, and he didn't want it. He negotiated his exit. He gave up certain things, he didn't name them. He kept certain things, the letter, the photograph, the jacket. The jacket is mine, he wrote. I earned it. I bled for it. Whatever I gave up, whatever compromises I made to get out clean the jacket is the one thing I kept that was truly mine. It belongs to a version of me that existed before I had anything to protect. I am not ashamed of that version, even if I chose something different. I keep it because some things deserve to be kept. Then in the second page, if Claire finds this, and I have always thought she might be the one, she's thorough like her mother and curious like her father. I want to say something clearly. The jacket is yours if you want it. The name will protect you even now, even after me, if you carry it right. I am not here to tell you what to do with it, but I am here to tell you that you come from something real, something that was built on loyalty and blood before it went wrong. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't have the right to know that. Don't let anyone take it from you to make their own lives easier. You always were the best thing I ever did. Thomas Claire sat with the letter for a long time. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in the inside pocket of the jacket close to her chest, and went back to work. Outside, the SUV hadn't moved. Inside, something in Claire Morgan had moved considerably. She didn't have all the answers yet. She didn't understand the full map of what Thomas had been, what Vincent wanted, what the jacket meant, in the specific geography of this town and these people and this history, but she understood something foundational. Now something that didn't require full information to be true. Her grandfather had carried something real his whole life and chosen to protect her from it. And now that he was gone, the question of what to do with that thing, the jacket, the name, the history, the weight of all of it was hers. Vincent Cross could ask her to take it off for 100 years. She wasn't going to. Not until she understood why she was supposed to. Not until she understood, what she'd actually inherited. Not until she'd looked at every corner of the thing Thomas had been and decided for herself what it meant. She went to the window and looked at the SUV on the street. Then she looked at the reflection of herself in the dark glass. The patch stared back at her. Hell's Angels, Ridgecrest. She thought about the letter. You come from something real. She thought about Donna's face when she'd said no. She thought about Vincent's voice dropping to something that wasn't quite a threat, but was practicing in the direction of one. She was Thomas Morgan's granddaughter. She didn't know yet what all of that meant, but she was starting to find out. The SUV was gone by morning, but something else had arrived in its place, a feeling in the air of the town that Claire couldn't have named precisely, but recognized the way you recognize weather before it breaks. A pressure, a held breath, like Ridgecrest had gotten word of something overnight and was waiting to see what came next. She felt it when she walked to Mesa Cup at 7:30. The usual cluster of older men outside the hardware store across the street gone. Donna was behind the counter, same as always, but she poured the coffee before Claire reached the counter and slid it across without meeting her eyes, which was different from the day before. Something changed, Claire said. Donna's hands were already moving to the next task. People talk, she said quietly. Word gets around fast in a small town. Everybody knows Thomas Morgan's granddaughter is in the jacket. And that's a problem. It's a conversation. Donna glanced toward the window brief. A conversation people haven't had in a long time. Some of them didn't want to have it again. Claire wrapped both hands around the cup. Donna, who is Vincent Cross actually? Not what he does. Who is he? Donna was quiet for long enough that Claire thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, he came here about 15 years ago, bought the Rattler, that's the bar, on the south end, Iron Cross, now he renamed it. Started with the bar, then the property. Next door, then a piece of the logistics company over on Route 9. He's got his fingers in enough that the town sort of accommodates him. A pause. He's not club. He's never been club. But he knows how to use club history the same way someone uses a deed they bought secondhand. He knows where the bones are buried. He's made it his business to know. In the Hells Angels chapter in Ridgecrest, Claire said, is it still active? Another long pause. Technically, Donna said, there are still members, but it's not what it was. Your grandfather's generation, those men are dead or gone or retired from it. The ones left are, it's complicated. She wiped the counter. There's a reason Vincent hasn't bothered anyone in 15 years. There are still a few old names left who could make his life difficult if they chose to. Names like Thomas Morgan, Claire said. Names like Thomas Morgan. They looked at each other. Donna, Claire said, is there anyone left from Thomas's generation? Anyone who'd know the full history? Donna's eyes did the window flicker again. There might be, she said, but I don't know that he'd want to be found. Can you point me in a direction? Donna pressed her lips together. set down the cloth, looked at Claire with the careful expression of a woman calculating what she owed the dead and what she owed the living. "I'll make a call," she said. "No promises." Gerald Park's office was on the main street, second floor above a dry cleaner, the kind of office that had a plastic fern by the door and file folders stacked in ways that looked chaotic but probably made sense from inside. He was behind his desk when Claire came in without an appointment at 9, and he looked at the jacket and then at her face and then back at the jacket, and he said, "Sit down," before she'd even asked. "Vincent Cross came back," she said. "Yesterday morning. He told me the jacket was a violation of terms Thomas agreed to when he left the club. He wants it back." Gerald picked up a pen and put it down again, which was his version of agitation. "What exactly did he say?" "He said Thomas made an agreement that as part of leaving the club, certain conditions were set, including that nothing connected to the club be publicly shown. He wants the jacket. He said if I give it to him, he'll handle everything quietly and I can go back to Phoenix." Gerald nodded slowly. "Did he threaten you?" "He implied that his patience was a courtesy he could withdraw." "That's a threat," Gerald said flatly. "A well-dressed one." He was quiet for a moment, the pen going again between his fingers. "Claire, I need to tell you something about your grandfather's will." She straightened. "Thomas updated his will 18 months ago," Gerald said. "The house, the accounts, everything standard. That's all as you'd expect. But there was a codicil, a separate document sealed. He told me at the time that I was to give it to you only if someone came to ask for the jacket within 30 days of his passing." The air in the room changed. "And someone has," Claire said. "And someone has," Gerald confirmed. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and produced a sealed envelope, real wax seal, the kind nobody used anymore, pressed with something she couldn't make out. Her name on the front in Thomas's handwriting. "I have to tell you, I don't know what's in it. He sealed it himself and told me the conditions. That's all." She took the envelope. The wax was intact. She looked at it for a moment and then broke the seal. Inside was a single page, Thomas's handwriting tight and deliberate. "Claire, if you're reading this, then someone came asking about the jacket within the first month, which means the situation is what I suspected it might become after I was gone. I want to be brief because what I have to say is simple. The jacket is not the thing they want. It is what the jacket represents, namely that you are connected to me and that through me you have a claim on something they've been pretending doesn't exist for 15 years. There is a name. You may already know it. Silas Harlan. He knows everything. He chose to leave the life in the town, but he did not cut himself off the way I did. If you need him, go to the Iron Cross on a Thursday evening. He still comes through. I did not want this for you. I built a wall between my past and my family because I loved you and your mother more than I loved belonging to something. But love sometimes leaves its mark in complicated ways, and if Vincent Cross has come to the door, then the wall is not going to protect you anymore. So let me give you the one thing that will. Go find Silas. Tell him Thomas sent you. Show him the jacket. He'll know what to do. Trust the jacket. Trust the name. Don't trust anyone who asks you to give either one up, Thomas." She read it twice, then she folded it and put it in the same inside pocket where she'd put the letter the night before, close to her chest next to Thomas's other words. She looked up at Gerald Park, who was watching her with the careful face of a man who had practiced not knowing things about his clients. "Silas Harlan," she said. "What can you tell me?" Gerald exhaled. "He's a name from a long time ago," he said. "He was significant in the club. Not just here regionally, one of the senior figures. He's been quiet for years. I've heard he still comes through the area occasionally but doesn't live here anymore." He paused. "If Thomas named him in a sealed document, that means something." "Thomas said to find him Thursday at the Iron Cross," Claire said. "That's the bar Vincent Cross runs." Gerald stared at her. That's a very complicated location." "Yes," Claire said, "it is." "Claire, I have to be honest with you. Going into that bar in that jacket on a Thursday when Vincent's people will be there, that's not something I can advise." She stood, put the chair back where she'd found it, buttoned the jacket though it was getting warm outside. "You don't have to advise it," she said. "I just need you to know where I'll be in case anyone asks." Gerald sat back in his chair and looked at her the way people sometimes look when they see something they recognize and can't quite believe they're seeing. "You are exactly like him," he said. People keep telling me that, she said. I'm starting to take it as a compliment. The week moved in a specific rhythm after that. In the mornings, Claire went through the house, the work of dismantling a life which was slow and unglamorous and full of small ambushes. A drawer of birthday cards her grandfather had kept, most of them hers from years when she was still a regular sender. A shelf of woodworking books he'd apparently been working through, certain pages turned down. A small box in the hall closet with exactly 4 photographs inside, all of her mother at various ages, young enough in all of them that Claire had never seen them before. In the afternoon, she worked on the paperwork and she thought about Thursday. The SUV came back Wednesday. A different one this time, she noted the plate, though she didn't know what she'd do with the number. It sat for 2 hours in the afternoon heat and then left. No one approached the house. Vincent Cross called the landline at 4 o'clock. She hadn't known the landline number still worked, hadn't known anyone had it except people who'd known Thomas. I wanted to give you time to reconsider, Vincent said. His voice on the phone was identical to his voice in person, the same controlled, pleasant quality, like a temperature that didn't vary. I've had time, she said. I haven't reconsidered. Claire, I'm going to be clearer than I've been. Pause. You are not in the club. You have never been in the club. The rules that protected your grandfather, the agreements he made, the name he built, those attached to him. They don't automatically transfer to you. And if you continue to go around this town in that jacket, people are going to start asking questions about your right to wear it, and those questions will have answers you won't like. What answers? She said. That you have no standing, Vincent said. That you're a woman from Phoenix who found a jacket in a dead man's closet and decided it meant something. She let the silence sit for a moment. That's interesting, she said. Because I have a letter from the dead man that says different. Another silence, this one his. Shorter, more controlled, but she caught the edge of something in it. What kind of letter, he said, and his voice had shifted by a hair. Just a hair, but she caught it. Good night, Mr. Cross, she said, and she hung up. She sat by the phone for a while afterward with her heart doing something athletic in her chest. But she was smiling a little, which surprised her, and she thought, Thomas, you calculated this. You knew exactly what you were doing. Wednesday night she couldn't sleep. She lay in the spare bedroom. She hadn't been able to bring herself to sleep in Thomas's room that felt like a bridge she wasn't ready to cross, and stared at the ceiling and ran through what she knew. Thomas Morgan had been a Hells Angels member. Not peripheral, not casual, a central figure. A man with a name was standing with something worth protecting. He'd left. He'd built a wall. He'd raised a family on the other side of it and kept the wall solid for 40 years. Vincent Cross had arrived in Ridgecrest 15 years ago and had set up his operations in the space that Thomas's absence had created. Using what he knew, using the fear of old names, using the shape of the club's history without having any actual right to it. And then Thomas had died and a granddaughter had appeared wearing the one thing that made the old history visible again. The letter in the codicil was not an accident. Thomas had drafted it and sealed it 18 months ago, which meant he'd known he was running out of time, which meant he'd thought about what would happen after, which meant he'd made a plan. The plan was Silas Harlan. She turned that over in the dark. Trust the jacket, trust the name. She thought about what Donna had said. There are still a few old names left who could make his life difficult if they chose to. She thought about Vincent's voice when she'd mentioned the letter. That small shift, that hairline crack in the controlled surface. He wasn't as certain as he wanted her to believe. He was managing her, trying to move her out of the picture before she could connect pieces he didn't want connected, which meant the pieces connected to something real. Thursday, she thought. Just get to Thursday. She called her mother Thursday morning earlier than either of them usually called. You sound tired, her mother, Patricia, said immediately. I'm okay, Claire said. I want to ask you something. Okay. Did you know about Grandpa Thomas, what he used to be? A silence that was different from Gerald's silences and different from Donna's silences. This one had the specific texture of something long held. Why are you asking me this? Patricia said carefully. Because I found the jacket, Claire said, and the photograph, and there's a man here who's been coming to the house telling me to give it up, and I'm starting to understand that there's a history I was never told. Her mother breathed out slowly. He made me promise, Patricia said finally. When I was still young, he sat me down and told me there was a part of his life that was over, that it belonged to another time, and that he needed me to understand it was over. He didn't tell me details. He told me there had been a club and he had left it, and that was the end of it as far as our family was concerned. But you knew it was the Hells Angels, Claire said. I guessed, Patricia said. I found a photograph once when I was about 15. I didn't say anything. He never brought it up. A pause. Claire, what is happening there? Someone is trying to claim things that aren't his, Claire said. Dad's using Grandpa's past against his family because he's not here to defend it anymore. What are you going to do? Claire looked at the jacket draped over the chair by the door. What he told me to, she said. Sharpa. The Iron Cross didn't open until 4 in the afternoon, but Claire had driven past it twice in the week. She'd been in Ridgecrest once on an accident the first day. Once deliberately the day after Vincent first came to the house. A long, low building at the south end of town, the kind of place that didn't need signage to announce itself. It announced itself. She got there at 6. She was not naive about what she was doing. She'd thought about it all week, and she'd made her calculations the same way she made calculations at work, with the available data, with an honest accounting of the risks, with a clear outcome goal. The risk was real. The outcome goal was worth it. She wanted to find Silas Harlan. She wanted to understand what the jacket actually meant and what standing she actually had. And she wanted to look Vincent Cross in the eye in his own territory with Thomas Morgan's name on her back. The bar was not crowded at 6 on a Thursday, but it was not empty. A dozen people, maybe 15, spread across the space, some at the bar, some at tables, some in the back corner where a pool table sat under a hanging light. The music was low. The conversation was the kind that happens in a place where people know each other well enough to not need to say much. She walked in and she felt it again. That specific shift, the way the air in a room changes when something enters that disrupts the expected pattern. Heads turned, eyes moved. She walked to the bar and sat down on a stool and put her hands flat on the surface. The bartender was a man in his 40s, broad with a face that gave nothing away. He looked at her, looked at the jacket, specifically at the patch visible on the side where the jacket hung open. Looked at her face. What can I get you? He said, neutral. Club soda, she said, and I'm looking for someone, Silas Harlan. The bartender's expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it did. He poured the soda without answering. Do you know that name? She said. Why are you looking for him? The bartender said. Because Thomas Morgan sent me, she said. The bartender set the glass down, looked at her for a moment, really looked the kind of look that's actually assessing something. Then he moved to the other end of the bar and said something to another man standing there. That man glanced at her, nodded, and went toward the back. Claire sat and drank her soda and kept her hands on the bar and her back straight, and she did not look around the room because she had decided before she walked in that she was not going to look like she was afraid because she was Thomas Morgan's granddaughter. And apparently that meant something, and she was going to stand in that meaning until she understood it. She'd been sitting for about 4 minutes when she felt the temperature in the room change. Not toward her, away from her. Every eye in the place shifted to a point behind her left shoulder, and the low-level conversation stopped, and Claire became peripherally abruptly aware of the sound of the front door having opened in a way that didn't make noise but apparently made presence. She turned. She recognized him from the photograph. Not from his face, the photograph was nearly 50 years old, but from the way he stood. The same thing she'd noticed in the picture, the set of the jaw, the quality of the stillness. He was older now, clearly a big man running into his late 60s, the beard gone gray and worn short, the hair silver at the temples, heavily tattooed arms bare in a dark t-shirt. He wore no jacket. He looked at her, at the jacket. He went absolutely still. She'd expected various reactions, authority, dismissal, wariness. She had not expected this, an expression she could only describe as recognition, passing through a man who'd been trying very hard not to remember something. He crossed the bar in long, unhurried strides and stopped in front of her, and she watched his eyes go to the patch and stay there. Where did you get that? He said. His voice was deep, unhurried, the kind of voice you got from decades of speaking only when you had something to say. Thomas Morgan's closet, she said. I'm his granddaughter. He stared at the patch for another second. Then he looked at her face. Claire, he said, he talked about you. A lot of people have told me that this week, she said. Something moved through his expression. Sit down, he said, and then seemed to realize she was already sitting, and he almost smiled. He took the stool beside her without being asked. He wrote me a letter, she said, in a sealed document with his attorney. He said if someone came asking for the jacket within 30 days, I was supposed to find you. He said you'd know what to do. Silas looked at his hands on the bar. He was quiet for a moment, and it was the quiet of a man processing something large. He's been gone, 2 weeks? 12 days, she said, and Cross came to you. Twice in person, once by phone. He wants the jacket. He says there were terms when Thomas left the club, and one of them was that nothing club-connected be publicly displayed. Silas's jaw shifted. That's not exactly wrong, he said carefully. There were terms. Thomas agreed to them, but the terms were set between Thomas and the club. Vincent Cross was not part of that negotiation. He has no standing to enforce anything. Then why is he acting like he does? Because he bought a building and a reputation, and he spent 15 years running this town on the assumption that the old names wouldn't come back to complicate things. Silas looked at her steadily. And then you walked in wearing one of the oldest names this county has. The back of the bar chose that moment to change. She felt it before she saw it, the shift in the room's attention moving from Silas to the door at the back. And then Vincent Cross walked through it. He stopped when he saw her. His face went through a careful, rapid adjustment. Surprise first, then something else controlled. Then he saw Silas and the adjustment continued, and what landed on his face finally was an expression she hadn't seen on him before: caution. Cross, Silas said without raising his voice, without looking away from Claire. Silas, Vincent said from across the room. He stayed where he was. This is unexpected. Is it? Silas said. Vincent looked at Claire. Something moved behind his eyes. She found you. Thomas sent her, Silas said. A pause. Vincent's hands, she noticed, were very still at his sides. Thomas is dead, he said. Yes, Silas said. He is, and his granddaughter is wearing his jacket, which she has every right to do, and you've been coming to her door. Now he turned finally and looked at Vincent, and the quality of the look was something Claire felt on the back of her neck. That was a mistake, Vincent. The room was very quiet. Not the quiet of before when Claire had come in. That was the quiet of disruption. This was the quiet of a room full of people making themselves invisible. Vincent moved toward the bar, unhurried, controlled the performance of a man who wasn't rattled. He pulled out a stool 2 down from Claire and sat on it with the ease of a man in his own establishment. I was explaining to Claire that the jacket carries history that she might not fully understand, he said. I was trying to help her avoid complications. You were trying to take it, Claire said. I was trying to manage a situation, Vincent said, still pleasant, still directed at Silas. Certain agreements were made, certain lines were understood. The jacket showing up in the hands of someone who isn't. Stop, Silas said. One word, not loud, but the word had a weight to it that made Vincent stop exactly the way you stop when something very large and very certain stands between you and the next step. She is Thomas Morgan's blood, Silas said. She walked in wearing his name. You want to tell me she doesn't have the right to it? You can make that argument, but you're going to make it to more than me. Vincent looked at him. The pleasantness was still there technically, but it was doing the work of covering something that was no longer pleasant at all. This doesn't have to be a production, he said. This is a simple matter of old agreements and what do you actually want, Silas said. The question landed flat and direct, and for the first time since Claire had met him, Vincent Cross was visibly unprepared for the words he was being asked to speak. He looked at Silas and he looked at Claire and he looked at the patch on the jacket and he said, the past should stay in the past. Whose past? Claire said. Vincent looked at her. Yours, he said. Thomas's, mine. He paused. There are things connected to that jacket, documents, arrangements, agreements, that go back further than you know that could create significant disruption. For a lot of people. Including you, Claire said. Vincent didn't answer. What kind of documents? Silas said, and his voice had changed by a degree sharper now with an edge under it. Thomas kept documents. You didn't know, Claire said, and she was looking at Silas when she said it, and she watched something shift in his expression. What did he keep? Silas said. I don't know the details yet, Claire said honestly. I haven't found everything, but he left me a letter. He told me to find you. He told me to trust the name. She looked at Silas directly. He trusted you. That means something to me. Silas was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that has things moving inside it. Vincent Cross broke it. This is a conversation for another time, he said, standing. When there are fewer witnesses. He buttoned his jacket. Claire, I hope you understand that my concern has always been for your well-being. The pleasantness was back reinstalled with precision. Silas, a nod. He walked back toward the rear of the bar. And right at the moment he reached the back door, right at that moment, a sound filtered in from outside. Low, mechanical, unmistakable. The rumble of a motorcycle engine. Then two, then more. Vincent paused at the door. The engines kept multiplying. He pushed through without looking back. Claire looked at Silas. What is that? Silas hadn't moved from the stool. He was looking at the front windows of the bar, and his expression had gone somewhere distant, somewhere past what was immediately in front of him. He looked like a man who is hearing something he hasn't heard in a very long time. Thursday evenings, he said almost to himself. I came in on Thursdays for the last 6 months. I didn't think anyone was paying attention. Someone was, Claire said. He looked at her. Thomas probably, he said, or someone Thomas told. She let that sit for a moment. Who else, she said. Who else would have come? Silas's eyes went back to the window. The sound of the engines was still building, the low collective rumble of something that had once been organized into a formation and was remembering how. People who still hold to certain things, he said. People who knew Thomas Morgan and knew what it meant when he named you. A pause. People who've been waiting a long time to see if someone was going to hold the line. Claire looked at the jacket, at the patch. She thought about Thomas's letter. You come from something real. She thought about the sealed document, the careful planning of a man who knew exactly how long the wall was going to hold after he was gone. She thought about her hands not shaking when she told Vincent no. Not once, not any of the times. Outside, the engines idled and multiplied in the Ridgecrest evening, and inside the Iron Cross, the room that had gone quiet stayed quiet, and everyone in it was waiting for something. And Claire Morgan sat very still on a bar stool in her dead grandfather's jacket, and for the first time since she'd arrived in this town, she did not feel like a stranger passing through someone else's story. She felt like the point the whole story had been building toward. What that meant, what came next, what she was owed, what she owed in return, she didn't know yet. But Silas Harlan was beside her, and outside the engines were running, and the name on her back had called something back from wherever it had been living quietly for 15 years. And Vincent Cross had walked out of the bar looking like a man who had made a calculation and discovered too late that he'd gotten the numbers wrong. The engines outside didn't stop. They idled low and steady, the way engines do when the men on them aren't in a hurry, aren't leaving, are simply making themselves known. Claire counted the sound of at least 8, maybe 10 distinct bikes before she stopped counting, and she watched Silas's face while she listened, because his face was telling her more than the sound was. He looked like a man who had expected to be alone for the rest of his life and had just heard a knock on the door. How many people knew you came here on Thursdays, she said. I didn't advertise it, he said. He was still looking toward the front of the bar. I came because I needed to be somewhere familiar once a week. That's all I told myself. He paused. Thomas knew. I called him about a year ago, just to talk. We did that sometimes, called each other, and talked around the thing we were actually thinking about. A long pause. He asked me where I was spending my time. I told him. He filed that away, Claire said. Thomas filed everything away. Something in Silas's voice when he said it, not quite grief, not quite admiration. Something that was both and neither. He was the most deliberate man I ever knew, even back then. Even when everything was moving fast and loud, Thomas was always the one who was already thinking about what came next. The bartender came to their end of the counter not to serve them, but to lean in close. His voice was low. Silas, there are 9 bikes out front. I don't know all the faces. I do, Silas said. The bartender looked at him, looked at Claire, and went back to his end without another word. Claire felt the weight of the room differently now. Not the hostile attention of when she'd first walked in, but something that had reorganized itself around her, around Silas, around the fact that outside 9 motorcycles were idling, and Vincent Cross had walked out the back door, and everyone present was waiting to see what the shape of the next few minutes would be. Tell me about the documents, Silas said. He turned to face her now and his voice was direct. Thomas mentioned documents in the letter. He didn't use that word, Claire said. He said Vincent wanted the jacket because of what it represented, that I had a connection to him and threw him a claim on something. Vincent's the one who said documents. He said there were arrangements, agreements that could cause significant disruption. Silas was very still. Did Thomas leave you anything else, anything beyond the letter and the photograph? She thought about the letter she'd found the first night, the sealed codicil. She'd told Silas about the codicil, but the other letter, the one from the desk drawer, she'd kept close. To whoever finds this after I'm gone. He left a personal letter, she said. Not legal, not formal, just Thomas talking. Did he mention anything specific? Names, dates, locations? She looked at Silas carefully. She liked him. She trusted him more than anyone else she'd met in Ridgecrest, and Thomas had trusted him, which meant something. But she also understood, with the clarity that came from a week of being managed by Vincent Cross, that trust had to be proportional to what you actually knew. He mentioned you, she said, by name. He said you knew everything. Silas absorbed that. He was more generous than he should have been, he said. What do you know, she said. He was quiet for a beat that lasted exactly long enough to feel like a decision being made. When Thomas left the club, he said the negotiation was not simple. He wasn't a peripheral member. He was the chapter president. A chapter president leaving particularly under the circumstances that existed at the time. He stopped. There were things going on in the club in those years that needed to stay buried. Thomas knew those things. Thomas had been part of some of them and had tried to stop others. What kind of things? The kind that have legal consequences. Silas said even 30 years later. Even 40. He looked at her directly. Thomas leaving was manageable to the people above him because Thomas agreed to take certain knowledge with him and not act on it. In exchange, he got his clean exit. His family stayed safe. He got to build the life he built. He didn't destroy what he knew, Claire said. He kept it. That's what I would guess, Silas said. That's what a man like Thomas would do. Not to use as a weapon, Thomas wasn't that kind of man. But because he believed things should be kept, witnessed, documented. Because he thought that someday someone might need to know what actually happened, and he wasn't going to be the one who let the record disappear. Claire sat with that for a moment. Outside, the engines ran on. Vincent knew this, she said. He came looking for the jacket because if I'm wearing the jacket, I'm visible. And if I'm visible, someone might start asking me questions about what Thomas left behind. The jacket made you findable, Silas agreed. To good people and bad ones both. Which is why Thomas wanted me to wear it, she said, and heard the truth of it even as she said the words. Not just to honor a history, to be seen. To draw out the people who needed to be drawn out before she could understand what she was dealing with. She had been the bait, she realized. A willing, unknowing bait placed there by her grandfather's careful planning. She almost laughed at the elegance of it. Almost. He knew I'd wear it, she said. Did he? Silas said. He knew me, she said. He knew I wouldn't give it up when some stranger told me to. He knew I'd dig in. She shook her head slow. He built the whole thing around knowing me. Silas looked at her with something she recognized after a moment as the particular expression of a man being reminded of someone. Yes, he said quietly. He knew you. The front door of the Iron Cross opened. Not Vincent. Vincent had gone out the back. This was someone from outside. A man she hadn't seen before 50s, weathered a red and white patch on his vest that she now had context for. He stood in the doorway and looked at Silas and gave a small, deliberate nod. Silas nodded back. The man stepped inside and let the door close behind him. He didn't come to the bar. He just stood near the entrance with the solid, unhurried quality of someone taking up a post. Who is that? Claire said. Danny Reyes, Silas said. He was a prospect when Thomas was president. He's been the chapter's senior member for the last 8 years. He paused. He's the one Thomas would have called. Not Mom. But he's here, she said. He's here, Silas confirmed, which means he knows. He looked at her. Thomas reached out to him before he died. Had to be. Thomas put pieces in motion, and then he waited to see which ones would land. Claire thought about the man in the closet with his reading glasses on the nightstand, and his unfinished Western novel, and his yard that had gone wild. The man who'd asked her if she was eating enough and gotten off the phone in 10 minutes while she answered a work email. He had been running a long-out game, for years, maybe decades. waiting for the day when someone came for what he'd kept and making sure that when that day came, his granddaughter wouldn't be standing alone. She felt grief and love and something close to awe move through her in a single wave, and she let it pass without chasing it because this was not the moment. "What happens now?" she said. Silas pushed back from the bar. "Now," he said, "you and I go talk to Danny, and then we figure out what Thomas actually left behind and what it means." He stood. She stood. And the room, she noticed, adjusted around their movement and people shifting slightly, making space the way people make space for things that have gathered weight. Danny Reyes had a face that looked like it had decided a long time ago not to give anything away unnecessarily. He shook Claire's hand without ceremony and looked at the jacket, and his face did something brief and private that she didn't try to read. "You're Claire," he said. "I am," she said. "Thomas used to show me your school pictures," Danny said. "Not recent ones, old ones. You were maybe 8, 9 years old in the ones he had. He said you were the reason he did it." "Did what?" "Left," Danny said simply. She absorbed that. Thomas had told her in the letter that he'd left before she was born, before her mother was born. He'd left for the family he was building toward. And this man, who had been a teenager prospect when Thomas was president, had known that. Thomas had told him. She wondered how many of Thomas's truths lived inside other people, distributed like seeds he'd planted and left for her to find. "Cross came to her twice," Silas said to Danny, "and called. He wants the jacket." Danny's expression moved the smallest degree. "Of course he does. He invoked the exit terms," Silas said. Danny looked at him. "He has no standing to invoke anything." "That's what I told her." "Cross has been operating on borrowed authority for 15 years, Danny said. "Using the club's name, using the history, using the fear people have of old stories. He's not club. He's never been club. He bought a building and decided that gave him standing." "What is he?" Claire said. "If he's not club." Danny and Silas exchanged a look. "He's connected," Danny said carefully, "to people who have interests in certain operations that go back a long way. He's the managing layer, the face that the actual people behind him don't want to wear themselves. And those people," Claire said, "are they the ones who would be disrupted by Thomas's documents?" Another exchange of looks, this one longer. "Where are the documents?" Danny said. "I don't know that there are documents," Claire said. "Vincent implied it. I don't know what Thomas actually kept." "He kept something," Danny said. "I know that much. He told me once about 10 years ago, one of the times I drove through and stopped to see him, he told me he had what he called an accounting, his word. Said he'd written down everything he'd seen and everything he'd done, and that it was secure, and that if anything happened to him, the right people would know where to find it." "The right people," Silas said. Danny looked at Claire. "He told me the right people would find it, that he'd made arrangements." He paused. "I think you might be the arrangement." The three of them stood with that. "I've been through most of the house," Claire said slowly. "The main rooms, the closet, the study. I found the photograph, the personal letter, the sealed document with Gerald Park. I haven't finished the study. There's a locked filing cabinet I haven't been able to open. I was going to ask Gerald if he had a key." Silas looked at Danny. Danny looked at the floor, then back at Claire. "Does the jacket have inside pockets?" She looked down. She'd put 2 letters in the interior left pocket. She'd known about that pocket. But she hadn't. She reached across to the right interior side, and her hand found a seam she'd assumed was decorative. She pressed it. It was a hidden pocket, the kind of Taylor added deliberately with a zipper that had been broken long enough to sit unnoticed. She worked the zipper carefully. It resisted, then gave. Inside was a small key. Old brass, the kind that went with an older filing cabinet. A tag on it, faded paper, 3 digits in Thomas's handwriting, 247. Her heart was moving at a different speed than it had been 20 seconds ago. "Is that a cabinet number?" she said. "Or a combination," Silas said. "Or a safe deposit box," Danny said. They all looked at the key. "Gerald Park," Claire said. "If Thomas had a safe deposit box, Gerald would know." "Don't call him tonight," Danny said. "Not from here. Call him tomorrow from the house landline, and don't say what you found." He looked at her steadily. "Cross will have people who talk to people. Word that you found a key in the jacket will move fast, if it moves at all." She understood the caution. She put the key back in the pocket and rezipped it carefully. In the meantime, Silas said, you shouldn't be at that house alone tonight. I'm not leaving the house, she said immediately. I didn't say leave it, Silas said. I said you shouldn't be alone in it. She looked at him, looked at Danny. You think Cross would do something to the house? I think Cross has been patient because he thought he could manage you out of town before this got complicated, Danny said. It just got complicated. Patient men with a lot at stake have a limited supply of patience. She thought about the SUV parked outside, the car that had slowed and paced her on the street, Vincent's voice on the phone slipping by a hair when she mentioned the letter, the engines outside which were still audible, a sound that had not dissipated, not moved on. Waiting. All right, she said. What does staying safe tonight look like? Danny nodded toward the door. There are 9 people outside, he said. 3 of them have offered to park down the block from your grandfather's house until morning. Not visible, not a statement, just present. They came here for that, she said. They came because they came because the right people knew you'd be here tonight, Danny said. And the right people put out the word that Thomas Morgan's granddaughter needed to be seen. She stood inside that sentence for a moment. Needed to be seen, not protected in the way that implied vulnerability. Seen, acknowledged, placed inside a circle of recognition that Vincent Cross could not easily cross. Okay, she said. Okay. She left the Iron Cross at 8:30, Silas walking her to the door, Danny holding it. 3 men on bikes pulled away from the group outside and followed her car. At a distance, she could see them in her rearview mirror without feeling followed. She drove back to Thomas's house, let herself in, put the kettle on because she needed something to do with her hands. She stood in the kitchen in the jacket and she thought about the key in the hidden pocket and what 247 might mean and who Thomas had trusted it to before he'd put it somewhere his granddaughter would find it. She thought about the Iron Cross in the room that had reorganized itself around her and Silas, the bartender who hadn't asked questions, Danny Reyes standing at the door with the settled certainty of a man keeping a post. 9 bikes in the dark outside. She thought about her mother's voice that morning. What are you going to do? And her own answer, what had he told me to? She had done what he'd told her to. She had found Silas. She had worn the jacket. She had sat in the bar and held her ground when Vincent Cross walked through the back door. And something had responded. Something that had been quiet for 15 years had lifted its head and looked toward her. She did not know if that was a good thing yet. She knew it was a real thing. Real things required reckoning, not just reaction. The kettle started to whistle. She turned off the burner, made tea she didn't really want, and sat at Thomas's kitchen table and thought. The filing cabinet in the study. She'd noted it the second day steel old Model 3 drawers locked. At the time, she'd assumed it contained financial records that Gerald would need to go through. She hadn't tried to force it, hadn't asked about a key, had made a note and moved on. She went to the study now. The cabinet was where it always was. She looked at it, and then she looked at the 3-digit number on the key tag, and she looked at the cabinet, and she counted. 3 drawers, numbers on the front in faded marker. The kind of marker that had probably been written decades ago, top drawer 1, middle drawer 2, bottom drawer 3. Not 247. She turned the key over, looked at the tag from both sides. The other side of the tag had 1 digit 2, cabinet drawer 2, lock combination. She looked at the keyhole, standard filing cabinet key lock, not a combination. The key was for the lock. But why write just 2 on one side, unless the 47 on the front side meant something else? She sat on the floor in front of the cabinet with Thomas's letters in her inside pocket and the key in her hand, thought about how he thought, deliberate, every piece intentional, nothing wasted, 247. Page 247, the Western novel on his nightstand, with the bookmark in it. She was on her feet and moving before she'd finished the thought. The novel was still on the nightstand where she'd found it. She hadn't moved it. She'd told herself she didn't want to disturb things unnecessarily, but the truth was it had hurt to look at it, the bookmark in the unfinished story. She picked it up now and turned to page 247. The bookmark wasn't marking page 247. It was marking page 183. But page 247, she turned to it and looked at the text, and there in the margin in faint pencil, so light she would have missed it on a casual page through, was a 5-digit number, written in Thomas's tight, deliberate hand. Not a page number, a combination. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she went back to the study, sat in front of the filing cabinet, turned the key in the drawer to lock, and pulled it open. The drawer held files, old ones carefully labeled in Thomas's handwriting. She flipped through the tabs, dates going back to the late 1970s, through the 80s, the 90s, stopping in 2003. Each file was labeled with a date and a single initial. She pulled the oldest one, opened it. Inside were handwritten pages, Thomas's handwriting, dense and deliberate, the writing of a man setting something down accurately, not for an audience, but for the record. She read 3 pages before she understood what she was holding. It was as Thomas had called it, an accounting, detailed, dated, witnessed. Events she didn't have the context to fully interpret, yet names she didn't recognize, but laid out with the specificity of a man who intended the record to be usable. Not a confession, Thomas was careful to distinguish his own actions from others, but a witnessing, a record of what he had seen and known. She sat back on her heels and looked at the files in the drawer. 40 years of meticulous, careful documentation. She thought about Vincent Cross and what he'd said. Arrangements, agreements that could cause significant disruption. Disruption? That was one word for what this drawer might contain. She thought about closing it, going to bed, calling Gerald in the morning the way Danny had said. Being careful, being measured. She pulled out the second file instead. She was still reading when her phone buzzed at 11, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, and then she did. Claire. Vincent Cross, unmistakably. The pleasantness was gone now, fully not replaced by anger, but by something that was more honest and in some ways more alarming. Directness. I know you found something tonight. I know you talked to Silas and to Reyes. I know there are people outside that house right now. Then you're well informed, she said. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something clearly, he said. Whatever Thomas kept, whatever he wrote down, it's not what you think it is. What do I think it is? You think it's leverage, he said. You think it's protection, something that gives you standing, gives the old guard something to hold over people. He paused. But documents can work in multiple directions, Claire. Thomas was not an innocent man. His hands were not clean. Whatever he wrote down about other people, he's also in those pages. And the people who are named in those documents have resources I don't have. They have reach that extends well past this county. She understood what he was doing. She understood it clearly and without panic, which surprised her. He was telling her that the documents were a weapon that could harm the person who picked it up. That Thomas's accounting included Thomas. He knew that, she said, a pause. What? He knew that, she repeated. He kept it anyway. He left it for me anyway. He was not trying to protect his reputation, Mr. Cross. He was trying to preserve a record. Those are different things. Vincent was quiet for a moment. You're going to open a door, he said, that you will not be able to close. It's already open, she said. It's been open since I put on the jacket. Claire. Good night, Mr. Cross, she said and ended the call. She sat in the study with Thomas's files around her and the key in her hand and the letters in her pocket and the jacket on her back, and she let herself feel the full weight of where she was. She was sitting at the center of something her grandfather had spent decades building toward this moment. A man she had last called 14 months ago to tell him she was eating enough. A man who had never once told her who he'd been or what he'd done or what he'd preserved so carefully in the locked second drawer of an old filing cabinet under a number hidden on page 247 of an unfinished Western novel. He had loved her enough to keep her out of it. And then he had loved her enough to leave her a way in. She looked at the files. She had 3 drawers left to go through. She had Gerald Park in the morning. She had Silas Harlan and Danny Reyes and 9 people who had shown up on a Thursday evening because someone had made a call. And she had Vincent Cross on the phone telling her to be afraid of what she was holding. She put the phone face down on the desk, picked up the next file. Outside, somewhere down the block, 3 engines ticked quietly as they cooled present, deliberate there. Not moving anywhere, not going home. Thomas Morgan had known exactly who his granddaughter was. He had planned for exactly this. And now Claire Morgan sat in the study he'd used for 40 years, reading his handwriting in the lamplight, and she was beginning to understand not just who he had been, but who she was because of him. She was not afraid of the open door. She was the reason it had opened. She read until 2 in the morning. Not all of it, there were 40 years of files in that cabinet, and she was one person running on adrenaline and cold tea, but enough. Enough to understand the shape of what Thomas had kept. Enough to understand why Vincent Cross had been so careful, so polished, so relentlessly patient in his approach. Enough to understand that when he'd said the documents could cause significant disruption, he had been performing the most dramatic understatement of his career. Thomas Morgan had not kept a diary, he had kept evidence. The distinction mattered enormously. A diary was personal record, subjective, emotional, the kind of document a skilled attorney could dismiss as the reminiscences of a biased participant. What Thomas had assembled over 4 decades was something different. Dates, names, locations, amounts, witnesses where he had them. Photographs in some of the later files, not many, but some tucked inside the folders with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood the difference between a statement and proof. She didn't have the expertise to evaluate all of it. Some of the early files from the late 70s and early 80s described events and people she had no frame of reference for. But the later files, the ones from the 90s and after, from the years when Vincent Cross had apparently been building his operation and inserting himself into the infrastructure of Ridgecrest, those she could follow. Thomas had documented the process of Vincent's arrival. Not because he'd been investigating him, she thought, but because Thomas had understood what Vincent was from the moment he appeared, and he'd known it would matter to record it. Property transactions that didn't add up. Business relationships between Vincent and people whose names had appeared in the earlier files, the ones from the club years. Money moving in directions that required explanation. And one file near the back of the second drawer that she had almost missed because it was thinner than the others and filed between 2 thicker folders as if placed there deliberately to avoid casual notice. Inside it, a single document. 12 pages handwritten different from the others in tone, not the clipped accounting style Thomas used for evidence, but something more personal, more direct. At the top of the first page, what Vincent Cross actually is, what he came here for, what I know and how I know it. She read all the 12 pages twice. By the time she finished the second reading, her hands were not entirely steady and the tea was long cold, and somewhere outside the 3 bikes down the block were still there, and none of that was enough to account for the size of what she was holding. Vincent Cross had not come to Ridgecrest to buy a bar and run legitimate operations in a small Arizona town. He had come because of something specific that existed in Ridgecrest, something the club had established in the early 80s that Thomas had been president over, and that had been deliberately dismantled and the official records of it buried when Thomas left. Vincent represented the people who wanted what those records described, had spent 15 years positioning himself in the town building, relationships, making himself indispensable, waiting for Thomas Morgan to die so he could finally look for what Thomas had never let him find. He hadn't come for the jacket, he had come for the files. The jacket was just the thing that had made Claire visible. She sat in Thomas's study at 2 a.m. with 12 pages of her grandfather's handwriting in her lap and understood completely why he had planned this the way he had. Why Silas? Why Danny Reyes? Why the key in the hidden pocket, the number on page 247, the sealed codicil with Gerald Park. Thomas had not been able to go public himself. The terms of his exit had been real, not just with the club, but with whatever was behind the club, the layer beneath that Vincent represented. Going public would have endangered Patricia, would have endangered Claire, would have ended things badly for people Thomas loved. But he had built a record so complete, so careful, so meticulously preserved that when the time came when he was gone and the protection of his living presence was removed and Vincent came looking, the person who found it would have everything they needed. He had left her a weapon, and he had spent years making sure she'd be the kind of person who knew how to hold one. She closed the file, held it for a moment. Then she got up, went to the kitchen, poured the cold tea down the drain, made fresh, and called Silas. It was 2:15 in the morning. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he hadn't been sleeping either. I found the files, she said. A pause. How bad is it? Depends on which side you're on, she said. For us, it's significant. For Vincent Cross and the people behind him, it's catastrophic. Another pause longer. Claire, are you safe right now? The bikes are still outside, she said. I can hear them. Good. His voice had shifted to something more alert. What exactly did you find? 40 years of documented evidence, she said. Names, dates, transactions. and a 12-page statement from Thomas specifically about Vincent Cross, who he is, who he actually works for, what he came to Ridgecrest to find. Who does he work for? She told him the name Thomas had written. The silence on the other end of the line lasted 4 full seconds, which was she was learning a significant amount of silence for Silas Harlan. Thomas had proof of that, Silas said. Thomas had proof of everything, she said. That was apparently the point. All right. She could hear him moving, the sound of his environment changing as he walked. Don't touch anything while tonight. Don't move. The phase, don't photograph them. Don't tell anyone else what you found. Tomorrow morning, early 6:30, Danny and I will come to the house. We're going to need to talk about what to do with this before Vincent figures out that the game changed tonight. He already knows something changed, she said. He called me at 11. He warned me that the documents could hurt Thomas's reputation too. He was trying to scare me off. Did it work? What do you think? She heard something that might have been the beginning of a laugh stopped before it fully formed. Go to sleep, he said. Or try to. I'll be there at 6. She put down the phone and looked at the filing cabinet. She did not go to sleep. She didn't try. She sat in the kitchen with her tea and the jacket and the letters in her pocket, and she thought about her grandfather, and she let herself feel the full size of who he had been. Not the version she'd known, the quiet man with the garden and the pickup truck and the library books. That man was real, she didn't doubt it. Thomas Morgan had built that life, genuinely had lived it, with full sincerity, had loved the family he'd made on the other side of the wall with everything in him. But he had also been this. He had also been the man who could spend 4 decades keeping a secret and a record simultaneously, who could negotiate his exit with precision and honor the terms of it without ever letting it erase what he'd witnessed, who could plan from beyond death with enough intricacy that his granddaughter ended up exactly where he needed her to be. She thought about the school photographs he'd shown Danny Reyes. You were maybe 8, 9 years old. He said you were the reason he did it, the reason he left, and now the reason he'd found a way to finish it. She pressed her hand flat against the inside of the jacket, against the pocket where his letters lived, felt the paper through the leather. I've got it, Grandpa, she said to the empty kitchen. I've got it. What? Silas arrived at 5:50, Danny Reyes 10 minutes after. She had coffee made and the files stacked in order on the kitchen table and Thomas's 12-page statement on top. Silas read it standing up. Danny read it sitting down. Neither of them spoke while they read. When Silas finished, he put the pages down and looked at Claire. He named the principal, he said. I know, she said. The principal is not at a local problem, Silas said. This isn't Vincent Cross level. This is federal jurisdiction, potentially. This is the kind of documentation that... He stopped. How did Thomas sit on this for 40 years? He wasn't sitting on it, Claire said. He was waiting. He was waiting for a moment when it could do something real. When using it wouldn't just get buried again. She looked at him. He thought that moment was now. Why now? Danny said. Because he's gone, Claire said. Because when he was alive, he was the target. Come after the documents. You come after Thomas, and Thomas had protection. But after he died, the documents are just documents. They can be found by the right people, and they can be acted on without anyone needing to put themselves in the line of fire. Except you, Silas said. I was already in the line of fire the moment I put on the jacket, she said. He knew I wouldn't back down. He knew Vincent would come to the house. He knew I'd dig. She picked up her coffee. He planned for who I actually am. Danny had been quiet, looking at the statement pages. The principal Thomas named, he said slowly. If we take this to the wrong people, it disappears. You understand that? I understand that, she said. So who are the right people? The three of them looked at each other around Thomas's kitchen table. I know someone, Silas said. I've been not using this contact for 20 years because I never wanted to be the man who used it. But I know someone at the federal level who's been building a case on the organization Thomas named for a long time. Who would know what to do with this? Can you trust them? Claire said. As much as you can trust anyone in that position, Silas said, which is conditionally, situationally. He looked at the files, but with what Thomas documented, they'd be foolish not to act on it. This is too solid to ignore, too specific. Make the call, she said. Silas looked at her for a moment, just a moment. Then he picked up his phone. The call lasted 11 minutes. She sat across from Danny and drank her coffee and listened to Silas's end of it, which was mostly listening and short confirmations. And she watched Danny's face for a read on how it was going. Danny's face was doing the careful, stable thing it did when it was actually feeling something significant. When Silas ended the call, he set the phone down and looked at both of them. "She wants to meet today," he said. "She's 4 hours out. She can be here by 10. "Who is she?" Claire said. "Her name is Margot Vales," Silas said. "She's been working this particular thread for 11 years. She told me on the phone just now." He paused and something crossed his face that she hadn't seen there before. Something that looked almost like relief. "She said Thomas Morgan's name came up in her case materials 2 years ago. She said she'd tried to find him and found out he'd died 6 months before she looked." Claire set down her coffee cup. He was already on her radar. "The thing he kept wasn't just for us," Silas said. "He knew eventually the right person would be looking. He just needed to make sure it survived long enough to be found by the right hands. He left it to me to put it in those hands," she said. "Yes," Silas said. "He did." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Outside, one of the bikes started up shift change, probably someone who'd been there all night heading home as the daylight came in. The sound of it moved through Claire differently than it had when she'd first heard engines outside the Iron Cross. It didn't feel like threat or spectacle. It felt like what it was, people showing up because someone had needed them to. Her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. She looked at it, looked at Silas. "Answer it," he said. She picked it up. "Yes." "Good morning, Claire." Vincent Cross and his voice had changed in a way she registered immediately. The pleasant surface was still there, but underneath it, something had clenched. He knew something had moved. He didn't know what yet, but he could feel the ground shifting. "I'd like to meet today, somewhere neutral. I think we've both been talking past each other, and I'd like to address that." "Neutral," she said. "You mean somewhere that isn't the Iron Cross?" "Somewhere comfortable," he said. "I want to make you an offer, a real one, not the conversation we've been having. I think when you hear it, you'll see that cooperating with me is significantly better for everyone involved than the alternative." She looked at Silas. He was watching her face. She held up one finger, "Give me a second," and stepped into the hallway. "What kind of offer?" she said into the phone. "Financial," Vincent said. "Substantial. In exchange for the jacket and whatever Thomas left in that house. You walk away comfortable. No complications. No exposure. Clean." He knew about the files. Not specifically, he couldn't know she'd found them, not yet. But he knew Thomas had kept something, and he was escalating because last night had told him he was running out of time. "How substantial?" she said, and she kept her voice interested, not committed. "Buying time. Enough to pay off whatever debt you have, buy a house in Phoenix, and not worry about money for a decade," he said. "Catch or transfer your choice within 48 hours of delivery." "And the jacket," she said, "goes with the rest," he said. "Clean break. You never have to think about Ridgecrest again." She took a breath, thought about what she needed. "I'd need to see the files first," she said, "before I agree to anything. I need to know exactly what I'm handing over." A pause. "Of course," he said carefully. "That's reasonable." "Give me until noon," she said. "I'll call you." "I'll be waiting," he said, and he sounded relieved, and that relief told her exactly how frightened he actually was. She walked back into the kitchen. Silas and Danny were both watching her. "He offered to buy the files," she said. "Cash substantial, 48 hours. "He's panicking," Danny said. "He's been patient for 15 years, Silas said. "Patience has a ceiling. He hit it last night." "I told him I'd call him at noon," Claire said. "Margot Vales gets here at 10. That gives us 2 hours. Silas nodded slowly. 2 hours is enough. "I have one more question," she said. She looked at them both. The 12-page statement. Thomas's direct account of Vincent in the principal. He named the principal. He documented specific events, specific transactions, specific dates. If Vales takes this and acts on it, how much exposure does Claire Morgan have as the person who found it and turned it over? Silas and Danny exchanged a look that lasted a beat longer than comfortable. Some, Silas said, and she appreciated that he didn't soften it. Turning over documents that implicate federal-level organized crime connections, that's not without risk. There will be people who know the documents came from you. There will be a period of visibility where you'll need to be careful. How long? Until the case is solid enough that removing you doesn't change the outcome, he said. That's not a timeline I can give you exactly. She thought about that, let it sit. And if I don't turn them over, if I sit on them the way Thomas did for another 40 years, then Vincent Cross continues running this town. Danny said on Money and Connections that Thomas documented, and the people behind him continue operating with 40 years of evidence against them, sitting in a filing cabinet in a dead man's house. She nodded. She'd known the answer before she asked. She'd asked because she wanted to hear herself choose it in full information. All right, she said, let's get ready for Margot Vales. Margot Vales arrived at 9:50 in a dark sedan with government plates which she did not attempt to disguise. She was 52 compact with the kind of face that absorbed information without reacting to it. She shook Claire's hand at the door, looked at the jacket in the way everyone looked at the jacket and taking in the patch, reading it, registering it, and said, Thomas Morgan's granddaughter. Yes, Claire said, come in. Vales sat at the kitchen table. Silas and Danny she acknowledged with nods that had history in them. She'd met Silas before Claire realized, or at least knew who he was. The files were on the table. She looked at them without touching them. Tell me how you found them, she said. Claire told her everything in order without editorializing. From the closet to the jacket, to Vincent's first visit to the Iron Cross, to the key in the hidden pocket, to the number on page 247. She told it straight and clean, and Vales listened without interrupting, her face doing exactly nothing the entire time, which was unnerving in a way Claire found she respected. When Claire finished, Vales looked at the files. May I? Yes, Claire said. Vales opened the first file. Read, moved to the next. She was fast, not skim fast, but practiced fast, the reading pace of someone who had spent years processing exactly this kind of material. She spent the longest time on the 12-page statement. When she finally looked up, she looked at Claire. You read all of this? Most of it, Claire said. The statement in full, the earlier files partially. You understand what's in the statement? I understand enough, Claire said. Vales was quiet for a moment. 2 years ago, when I found out Thomas Morgan had died, I spent a week trying to find if he'd left anything behind. I had his name in the peripheral materials of a case I've been building. I knew he'd been positioned to know things. I didn't find anything. She looked at the files on the table. He hid it well. He hid it so only the right person could find it, Claire said. He designed the path. For you specifically, Vales said. Yes. Vales looked at her steadily. Miss Morgan, if I take these files and proceed with them, there will be a period of time during which your name will be known to people who are not going to be happy about the existence of this material. That risk is real, and I'm not going to minimize it. Silas already told me, Claire said. I'm aware. And you want to proceed? I want to do what my grandfather spent 40 years building toward, she said. Yes. Vales looked at her for another moment, and then she did something Claire hadn't expected. She nodded. Not the professional nod of an official acknowledging information. Something more personal. A recognition. He was protecting this for a long time, she said, and he was protecting you. He was doing both, Claire said, at the same time. They're not separate things, Vales said. Protecting evidence for the right moment and protecting the people you love. He found a way to make those the same plan. The kitchen was quiet. Danny was looking at the window. Silas was looking at the table. Claire was looking at Margot Vales and thinking about Thomas on a Sunday phone call, asking if she was eating enough, and the school photographs he'd shown Danny Reyes and the line in his letter, "You always were the best thing I ever did." What happens now, she said. Now I take the files, Vales said. Photographs first in your presence, so you have a complete record of what existed before it left this house. Then I take the originals. I go back and I begin the process. She paused. It will not be fast. These things are never fast. But with what Thomas documented, it will happen. Vincent Cross offered to buy it all, Claire said. This morning he called offered cash. Vales's expression moved by a degree. How much? Enough to buy a house and not worry about money for a decade, Claire said. His words. He's scared, Vales said. When they offer money, they're scared. When they stop offering money. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I told him I'd call him at noon, Claire said, to give him an answer. Vales checked her watch. It's 10:15 now. We can be done here by 11:30. I'd like to be gone before you make that call." "What do I say to him?" Claire said. Vales looked at her. Something in the look was both professional and, Claire thought, quietly pleased. "Say no," she said. "Whatever words you want to use, but say no." Claire nodded. Vales opened her bag and produced a camera. They photographed everything. Every page of every file, every photograph inside the folders. The key from the hidden pocket, the note from page 247. Vales documented the chain of custody with a precision that Claire understood was deliberate, every step recorded, every person present noted, every decision traceable. Silas signed a statement about his knowledge of Thomas's history and the context of the materials. Danny signed one about his own history with Thomas and knowledge of Vincent Cross's operations in Ridgecrest. Claire signed a statement about how she found the files, what she read, and her decision to turn them over. Her hand was steady while she signed it. She noticed that. At 11:40, Margot Vales packed the files into a case, shook hands with all three of them, looked one more time at Claire's jacket and said, "Your grandfather would be..." She stopped. Professional restraint. He built something important here, with what he kept and with who he trusted it to. She left through the front door. The sedan was gone in under a minute. The three of them stood in Thomas's kitchen in the sudden quiet of aftermath. "It's done," Danny said. "It's started," Silas said. "Done comes later." "You two stay," Claire said. "I'm going to make the call." She went to the living room, sat in Thomas's chair the first time she'd sat in it, the specific chair where he'd watched the news and argued with the television. It fit her wrong, too large, designed for a bigger man, but she sat in it anyway. She called the number Vincent Cross had called from that morning. He picked up before the second ring. "Claire." "Mr. Cross," she said. "I've made my decision." "I'm glad to hear it," he said, and she could hear the relief already building in his voice, the assumption already forming. "The answer is no," she said, a silence so complete she could hear him breathing. "No. No to the offer," she said. "No to the jacket. No to all of it. My grandfather spent 40 years protecting something important, and the people it belongs to have it now. Not you, not the people behind you, the right people." The silence stretched. When Vincent spoke again, his voice had gone somewhere she hadn't heard it before, stripped of everything performative, landing on something raw. "You don't understand what you've done," he said. "I understand exactly what I've done," she said. "I did what my grandfather needed me to do. Claire, the people I work with have a federal problem now," she said. "A significant one." She paused. "You should probably call your attorney, Mr. Cross. Today I'd recommend." She ended the call. She sat in Thomas's chair for a long moment. Let the size of it settle. Let the fear and the pride and the grief and the something like completion move through her in whatever order they needed to move. Then she took out the letters from the inside pocket of the jacket. Both of them. Thomas's personal letter. "To whoever finds this after I'm gone," and the sealed codicil note. "If Claire finds this." She held them for a while. She thought about the filing cabinet, now empty, the files gone with Varlos. She thought about the key in the hidden pocket which she'd kept. She thought about page 247 and the penciled number in the margin of an unfinished Western novel, and how long Thomas must have sat thinking about where to put it, choosing that specific location because he knew the kind of woman his granddaughter would be, thorough and curious, the kind who finishes what she picks up, the kind who turns to the page that's been hidden. She pressed the letters to her chest over the jacket, over the patch that had started all of this. Outside, a single engine turned over. Another one answered it, and then another. Not the 9 from the night before, 3, maybe 4, but present, deliberate, still there, still there. Claire Morgan closed her eyes and she sat in her grandfather's chair, and for the first time since she'd arrived in Ridgecrest, she wasn't thinking about what came next. She was thinking about Thomas, about who he had been, what he had carried, how he had loved quietly, deliberately over decades in ways that only fully revealed themselves at the end. She thought, "I knew you. I thought I knew you. I had no idea. And also, I know you now. And also, thank you." The engines outside settled into their low, steady idle, not going anywhere, just present in the way that presence matters most, not loud, not demanding, just real, just there. She sat in Thomas's chair with his jacket on and his letters in her hands, and the fear that had been living in her chest since the first morning she'd pulled the jacket from the closet had gone somewhere else, replaced by something harder and quieter and more durable. Not certainty. The road ahead was not certain. Margot Vales had been honest about that, and Claire was not naive about it. But something. She opened her eyes and looked at the room around her. Thomas's room, Thomas's house, Thomas's careful life laid out in objects and photographs, and a library book with a bookmark in it. The jacket on her back was his. The letters in her hands were his. The files were with the people who needed them, which was what he'd intended. She had walked into something she didn't understand, and she had walked through it without flinching, and she had come out the other side holding something real. She put the letters back in the pocket, stood up from the chair, walked back to the kitchen where Silas and Danny were still there, still present, drinking her coffee and waiting without rushing her. "It's done," she said, which was what Danny had said earlier, and she understood now it wasn't accurate. Silas had been right that done was later, but it was true in the way that mattered most. The beginning was done. Silas looked at her. "How are you?" She thought about it honestly. "I'm all right," she said. "Actually all right." Danny nodded once, and it was the kind of nod that meant he believed her. Outside, one of the engines revved once brief, like punctuation, and then settled back into the quiet. The call from Margot Vales came 4 days later, at 7 in the morning. Claire had been awake for an hour already. She'd been waking early every day since she'd handed over the files, not from anxiety exactly, but from a kind of heightened alertness, the way your body stays tuned to a frequency after something large has moved through it. She'd been finishing the work she'd come to do. The estate paperwork, the donation runs, the conversations with Gerald Park about timelines and transfers. Ordinary work, necessary work, the kind that asked nothing of her except attention, and she gave it willingly because attention was something she had in abundance right now. She picked up on the first ring. Two things Vales said without preamble, which Claire had come to understand was how Vales operated information delivered in order of importance, no wrapping. First, Vincent Cross retained an attorney yesterday afternoon. Second, there were 2 men outside your grandfather's house last night. Not Club, not any of Danny's people. They left at around 3 in the morning. I need you to tell me if you noticed anything. Claire walked to the front window. The street was empty, morning quiet. "I didn't notice anything," she said. "I was asleep by 11. "All right." A pause. "I want you to stay aware, not alarmed aware. The principal Thomas named has significant resources, and those resources include people who gather information. They're not going to do anything visible or aggressive at this stage because they don't know exactly what we have yet. But you should assume you're being looked at." "I've been looked at since day one," Claire said. "This is different," Vales said. "What was watching you before was Vincent Cross managing a local situation. What might be watching you now is something with a longer reach and a colder calculation." She paused. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because Thomas went to considerable lengths to protect you, and I intend to continue that work." Something moved through Claire. At that, the phrase "continue that work," as if Vales had picked up a thread Thomas had been holding and was now carrying it forward. She understood that was exactly what was happening. "What's the timeline?" Claire said. "On the case." "I can't give you specifics," Vales said. "I can tell you that what Thomas documented is being treated as a significant find. There are people in my organization who have been looking for exactly this material for a long time." A pause, and something shifted slightly in Vales's controlled voice, something that was not quite emotion, but was in its neighborhood. "He was meticulous, your grandfather. 40 years of documentation and not a single file out of order. Not a single date that doesn't check out as far as we can verify in the first 72 hours. Another pause. He knew what he was doing. "He always knew what he was doing," Claire said. After she hung up, she stood by the window for a while. The street stayed quiet. She watched it anyway. She thought about Thomas's filing cabinet, now empty except for the hanging file frames. She'd looked at it yesterday, really looked at it, the way you look at something that used to hold weight. There was something both hollow and relieved about it. 40 years of careful keeping now in the right hands. The cabinet had done its job. So had the man who'd filled it. She went to make coffee and found herself thinking about what she was going to do when the estate was fully settled. She had a lease in Phoenix that renewed in 3 weeks. She had a job she'd been handling remotely and would need to return to. She had a life she'd left on pause. The question of the jacket had not left her even with everything else. She'd worn it every day since she'd pulled it from the closet, which was now close to 2 weeks, and the weight of it had changed. It didn't feel heavy the way it had that first morning in the hardware store when the cashier had looked at her twice and the men by the paint display had gone quiet. It felt worn, in the way clothing feels when it's become yours, when your body has learned it. She didn't know what that meant about what came next. She was still working that out. Silas came by that afternoon. Not arranged, he just appeared the way he'd started doing in the days since the filing cabinet dropping by Thomas's house in the late afternoon, with the ease of a man who had once known this address well and was remembering that. He knocked, which she noticed and appreciated. She let him in and poured coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table, which had become their table over the past 4 days, in the way that shared circumstances create shared spaces. "Vale's called me too," he said. "The men outside the house," she said. "Yes," he wrapped both hands around the mug. "I want to be honest with you about something." "All right." "When Thomas called me a year ago and told me you were his granddaughter, and that if anything happened to him, I should—" He stopped, started again. He didn't phrase it as a request. He said, "Silas, she's going to need to know who her people are." That's what he said. Not help her or protect her. Know who her people are. Claire looked at him. "He thought I had people here. He thought that if the right things happened, you would," Silas said. He thought the history, the name, the jacket, the club connections, even the old ones like Danny, he thought if you showed up wearing his name, the people who had respected him would recognize you. He paused. He was right. He was right about a lot of things, she said. He was wrong about one, Silas said, and something in his voice shifted to something careful. He thought you'd need more time to find your footing. He said that in the same call he said, "Give her room, she'll be stubborn about accepting help." He expected the first week to be harder for you than it was. Claire thought about her first morning in the hardware store, the cash register kid who'd looked twice. She thought about Vincent at the door with his professional smile and his polite threat. She thought about sitting on the bar stool at the Iron Cross, waiting for something she didn't know the name of yet. "Was it not hard?" she said. "You walked into the Iron Cross alone," Silas said. "In the jacket, at 6 o'clock on a Thursday. Vincent Cross was in the building." "I knew you might be there," she said. "You didn't know I'd back you up," he said. "You didn't know Danny would be outside. You didn't know what the room would do when you walked in. You sat down at the bar in the middle of that and ordered a club soda." He shook his head small. "Thomas underestimated you. He also overestimated me," she said. "He left me everything and assumed I'd know what to do with it." "Did you?" She looked at him. "I called you," she said. "That was the one thing he told me to do. I did that. Everything else was just following the thread." "That's not nothing," Silas said. "Following the thread when everything around you is telling you to cut it and go home, that's not nothing, Claire." She looked down at the jacket draped over the chair beside her, the patch facing up. She'd taken it off for the first time in 10 days when she'd come in from a donation run in the afternoon heat, and she hadn't put it back on yet, and that was the longest it had been off her body since she'd pulled it from the closet. "What does it actually mean?" she said. "The jacket, for me, not historically, not in terms of what it did this past week. What does it actually mean that I have it now?" Silas was quiet for a moment, which she'd learned was how he answered serious questions. He went quiet first, not to stall, but because he was actually thinking about it. "It means you are connected to something real," he said. "It means people who still hold to certain codes will look at you and see Thomas Morgan's name. That has value in some circles and weight in others." He looked at the jacket. "But it doesn't obligate you to anything. That's what I'd tell you if you asked, and I think you're asking. It doesn't require you to take on the life Thomas had before he built the life he chose. The jacket is yours. What you do with it is yours." "Thomas said the same thing," she said. "In his letter, you have the right to decide your own path." "He meant it," Silas said. "He left more than enough that the files, the name, the connections to keep you safe if you choose to go back to Phoenix and live your life unchanged. You don't have to become anything you're not." She thought about that. She thought about Phoenix, the apartment, the job, the lease renewing in 3 weeks. She thought about how the last 12 days had felt hard in ways she hadn't expected clarifying, in ways she hadn't anticipated real, in a way that she was having difficulty remembering the last time something had felt that way. I'm not going back unchanged, she said. That's already done. No, Silas agreed. That's already done. Quip him. The twist arrived the following morning in the form of Gerald Park calling at 8:15 with a voice that was doing its careful management of something he clearly needed to deliver in person. Can you come to the office, he said, this morning if possible. What happened? There's someone here who I'd rather explain in person, Claire. She was there in 20 minutes. But Gerald's office had a man in it she hadn't seen before. 60s, lean, silver-haired, wearing a jacket that was neither suit nor casual, the specific neutral territory of someone who'd spent a career being nondescript. He stood when she came in. Ms. Morgan, he said, my name is Robert Ferris. I'm an attorney. I represent certain interests that have become relevant to your situation. She looked at Gerald. Gerald looked carefully neutral. He came this morning, Gerald said. He has documents he says are pertinent to the estate. She looked back at Ferris. Whose interests? The estate of a man named Carl Bowen, Ferris said. Mr. Bowen passed away 8 months ago. Prior to his passing, he left certain instructions regarding the Morgan estate contingent on specific events. She had never heard the name Carl Bowen. I don't know that name. You wouldn't, Ferris said. Mr. Bowen was a business associate of your grandfather's. From many years ago, they had an arrangement, a long-standing one. He opened the briefcase on the chair beside him and produced a document, set it on Gerald's desk. Mr. Bowen held a deed to a property, a commercial property, 1 acre on the north edge of Ridgecrest. He held it in trust with instructions that upon his death, it would transfer to Thomas Morgan. When Thomas died first, the instructions specified that it would transfer to Thomas's direct heir, his granddaughter, if she came to claim the estate in person. Claire looked at the document, then at Gerald. Gerald was reading it, his face doing the careful processing of a man checking for legal anomalies. What property, she said. A garage, Ferris said, in the building behind it, currently unoccupied. Mr. Bowen used it for storage in his later years, but it was originally what? He paused. It was originally the chapter's property from the 70s and 80s. When the chapter dispersed, it passed through a series of hands for legal protection. Bowen was the final holder. He and your grandfather agreed years ago that it would come home if someone in the Morgan family came to claim it. She sat down in one of Gerald's chairs, not because she needed to, because the alternative was standing very still, and she didn't want to do that in front of Ferris. My grandfather owned a building, she said. Your grandfather will own a building, Ferris said carefully, and now you do. She looked at Gerald. Is this real? Gerald had finished reading. He looked up. The deed is legitimate, right, he said. The trust instrument is properly formed. This is real, Claire. Why didn't Thomas tell me? She said, and she was surprised by the texture of the question. Not anger, just genuine confusion. After everything he'd laid out so carefully after the letters and the key and the number on page 247, a building he'd never mentioned. He may have wanted you to make your decisions without it on the table, Gerald said slowly. If he'd said, come deal with my estate, and by the way, you might inherit commercial property, you'd have known there was something significant here before you were ready to understand what significant meant in this context. She thought about that, Thomas's deliberateness, Thomas's careful construction of what she'd find and when. The jacket first so she'd be visible. Vincent's approach so she'd be tested. Silas so she'd understand the history. The files so she'd have something real to act on. In a building at the end, only after she'd proven something to herself, maybe more than to anyone else. He had sequenced everything, down to the commercial property. Can I see it? She said to Ferris. You own it, he said. You can do whatever you like with it. She drove there that afternoon. Danny Reyes came with her. He'd been by the house that morning and she'd told him about Ferris, and he'd gone very still, in the way he went still when something moved him more than he wanted to show. The building was on the north edge of town, set back from the road behind the garage structure that fronted the property. The garage itself was solid old, but well built, the kind of construction from the era when things were built to outlast the people who built them. The building behind was large, more than she'd expected, a long, rectangular space with high ceilings and a concrete floor. She stood in the middle of it with Danny beside her and looked at the space around her. What was it, she said, when it was the chapters. Danny looked at the walls of ceiling. Meeting space, he said, and events sometimes. The club ran benefits who were out of here a few times, charity rides, fundraisers. Your grandfather organized those. He was good at that part of it, bringing people together for something real. He was quiet for a moment. This is where I became a prospect. Thomas sponsored me. I was 22. He brought me in here and introduced me to the chapter and said, "This one's going to matter." I didn't know what he meant for years. She looked at the space with that layered over it now. Thomas, at some younger age, she'd only seen in photographs, standing where she was standing, looking at a 22-year-old Danny Reyes and seeing something worth believing in. He saw people, she said. He saw people. Danny agreed. It was the thing he was best at. She turned slowly, taking in the whole space. She had a building in Ridgecrest, a town she'd arrived in 12 days ago to handle an estate and get back to Phoenix before the end of the month. She thought about her lease, her job, her apartment where everything was familiar and nothing was this. She thought about the last 12 days and the quality of being alive they'd had, not comfortable, not easy, but real in a way she was having trouble naming and equal trouble dismissing. She thought about what Donna had said that first morning at Mesa Cup. Whatever he was before, whatever they tell you about him, you hold on to that. He was a good man. She thought about the people who'd shown up Thursday evening, 9 bikes, people who still held to certain things. She thought about the empty filing cabinet and Margot Vales in her dark sedan driving out of town with 40 years of Thomas Morgan's meticulous care. She thought about this jacket, which she was wearing again, had put back on before she left the house because it had felt wrong to come here without it. "Danny," she said, "yeah, what would this space need to be usable again?" He looked around with a different quality of attention now. Assessing. "Electrical's probably fine. It was updated last time I was in here, maybe 6 years ago. Plumbing in the bathroom at the back. Structure's sound." He walked the length of the space. "Cleaning paint, some furniture. It's not a big job. It's a month of weekends if you had people." "Would people come," she said, "to help?" Danny looked at her. Something in his face was very careful, very present. "If you asked," he said, "yes." She stood in her grandfather's building in her grandfather's jacket, and she let the question she'd been turning it over for 3 days move to the surface. She could go back to Phoenix. She could sell this building, forward the estate proceeds, and return to the life she'd had. Nothing required her to stay. Silas had said it. Thomas had said it. She had the right to decide her own path. But she was Thomas Morgan's granddaughter, and Thomas Morgan had spent 40 years building something and protecting something and waiting for the right moment, and the right moment had been her, and the path he'd laid out had led here to this building, to this town, to these people, and she was standing in the middle of it in a jacket that fit her now the way it hadn't on the first day. She wasn't the same person who'd pulled into this driveway 12 days ago with a suitcase and a to-do list and guilt about 14 months of short phone calls. She was someone who had walked into the Iron Cross alone, someone who had read her grandfather's 40 years of careful work by lamplight at 2 a.m, someone who had told Vincent Cross no 3 times and meant it more each time, someone who had sat on a bar stool and waited, and what had answered the waiting was 9 motorcycle engines in the dark. She was Thomas Morgan's granddaughter. She was beginning to understand that was not a passive thing. It was not a thing you inherited and stored and occasionally thought about. It was a thing you carried forward. It was a thing you did. "I'm not going back to Phoenix," she said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a sentence set down in the quiet of the building, true, in the way statements are true when you've been thinking them for days and finally say them in the right place. Danny turned to look at her. His face was doing the thing where it wasn't doing anything, but she was learning to read the space around his stillness now. He was moved. "You sure?" he said. "I'm sure," she said. "I'm going to renew my lease remotely and ask my boss for another month. And then I'm going to figure out what this space is for." She looked around the building. Thomas ran benefits out of here. Charity rides, community things. She looked at Danny. "That's still possible with the right people behind it," Danny said. "Yes." "Then that's where I start," she said. Vincent Cross left Ridgecrest 10 days later. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. His car was at the Iron Cross on a Tuesday and gone by Wednesday. The Iron Cross stayed open under different management, a local couple who'd been trying to buy it for 3 years, Claire learned, and who had gotten a very sudden opportunity when Vincent's attorney called them. She heard about it from Donna over coffee on a Wednesday morning that felt ordinary in the specific way mornings feel ordinary when everything around them has shifted. "He's not coming back," Donna said. She didn't sound triumphant. She sounded the way people sound when something long and heavy is lifted and the body hasn't caught up to the lightness yet. No, Claire said. I don't think he is. Donna refilled her cup without being asked, looked at the jacket. You're staying, she said. Again, not a question. I'm staying, Claire said. For now, I'm figuring it out. Donna nodded, set the pot down. Thomas would have liked that, she said. He used to come in here every morning. Sat at that same stool for 20 years. Every morning, black coffee, 20 minutes, then gone. She smiled small and real. He talked about you on and off for as long as I knew him. When you were little, mostly. What you were like, what you'd probably be when you grew up. She paused. He said you were going to be the kind of person who finished things. Claire set down her cup. Did I finish it? Donna looked at her for a long moment. You finished what he started, she said. That might be the same thing. Margot Vales called 3 weeks later with an update she could only partially give. The case has been formally opened, she said. I can't tell you timeline or specifics. What I can tell you is that what Thomas kept is being treated as a foundation, not just supplementary foundational. His documentation is more complete than what we had from any other source. She paused. There will be a point, probably 6 months from now, maybe longer, where your name will be in some motion or filing. I want you prepared for that. I'll be prepared, Claire said. You're still in Ridgecrest, Vales said. It wasn't a question she knew. That was her job. I'm still here, Claire said. Good, Vales said, and she said it in a way that was more than professional. That's actually good. After the call, Claire sat in the kitchen of Thomas's house, her house now, the transfer complete, Gerald Park having done the paperwork with characteristic thoroughness, and she thought about what 6 months from now looked like. She thought about the building on the north end of town and the people Danny had started calling to help with the renovation. She thought about the first charity ride she'd begun planning, talking through the logistics with Silas on the phone twice this week, his voice warming by degrees as the practical details got discussed as the thing started taking shape. She thought about her mother who had called every 2 days since Claire had stayed, who had cried twice on the phone and laughed once, and who was planning to drive down in a month the first time she would be in Ridgecrest since she was a young woman. She thought about what Donna had said. He finished things, and you're going to be the kind of person who finishes things. She looked at the jacket on the chair, the patch, white background, red letters visible from across the room. Hell's Angels, Ridgecrest. She hadn't worn it every day anymore. Some days she did, and some days she didn't. And she was learning that this was its own kind of carrying, not performing the weight, but integrating and not making the jacket the thing that announced her everywhere she went, but knowing it was there and knowing what it meant and making her choices with that knowledge present rather than hidden. The jacket was not her identity. It was part of her inheritance. And inheritance was not identity. Identity was what you did with what you were given. Thomas Morgan had been given a road and had ridden it hard, and had seen where it led and had chosen differently. He had built a wall and raised a family on the other side of it and kept quietly the part of himself that was real and worth keeping. He had documented the truth and trusted it to the right hands. He had loved his granddaughter enough to plan beyond his own life. He had been a man who finished what he started. He had started something he couldn't finish himself. And so he had handed it to Claire. And Claire Morgan had walked into a bar alone and sat down on a bar stool and waited. And what had come to meet her was everything her grandfather had quietly, patiently, deliberately built for exactly this. She stood up, put on the jacket, picked up her keys. She had a building to renovate, a benefit ride, to organize a case, to wait on a house, to settle into a life, to build in a town she hadn't expected and couldn't quite leave. She had things to finish, and she was exactly the kind of person who would.